The story of Sisyphus is one of perseverance, a king eternally rolling a boulder up a hill as punishment for his sins. As a figure who cheated death twice, he was left endlessly pushing this boulder further and further up this hill, only for it to always come crashing down before the summit. I find the story of Sisyphus to be something that perfectly represents the lives us humans go through, as both individuals and a team. The life we live is filled with endless absurdities and repetitive labour. It's a journey that has no real reason to it besides personal goals. And I believe that this story is the perfect representation of how important it is to be relentless in your determination for success. You will always have a boulder to push, and there will always be a boulder to crumble. And I think that story can be showcased through the medium of video games. Despite their individual natures that are separate from what takes place in the real world, the emotional weight a game can carry is something that transcends all other forms of media. Their ability to grant people with a means of control is what lets them be so captivating to us all. And without it, I'm not sure I'd be the person I am today. When it comes to summiting a mountain, you often hear of people's experiences as grueling yet satisfying adventures that can massively transform someone. A deeper connection with the world is often mentioned as if these people have just had their third eye opened. And from an outsider's perspective like my own, I can't say I know what that feels like. When I watch how humans conquer such harrowing narratives for themselves, it leaves me wondering, why haven't I climbed a mountain yet? Well, I have. I just haven't been able to see it until now. Before beginning the trek upwards, we'll use the base of the mountain as an opportunity to familiarise ourselves with the journey ahead of us. The base of the mountain itself will also be used as a representation of base itself, the place to reflect on our adventure thus far, and an area to gather our senses before continuing our way up. The base is the most peaceful part of this video. Think of it as a bonfire from Dark Souls or a bench from Hollow Knight. Use its flat terrain and comfortable environment to keep yourself at ease. And I think now it's time. We have games to talk about. Games have a way of showing scale in a wholly unique way to any other form of media out there. When it comes to making a world feel massive, developers need to factor in thousands of things to make sure a digital environment doesn't feel stale to venture through. Whilst many games focus on scale horizontally, the ones that stand out to me are those that make it scale just as meaningfully for its verticality. When you're playing a game such as an open world Zelda title, you'll find that Nintendo makes a conscious effort to give Hyrule a sense of realism with its world, and this is done through its abundance of height changes throughout the land. You can be in the darkest slums of the world and look around you to witness scarily gigantic cliff faces staring down at you. Small hills feel overpowering to a Link that is so minuscule in comparison to the environment around him. Walking on a dirt path like this one, you get a sense of how seamless verticality can vastly impact a player's feelings with the world that they're playing in. Not being able to see what's over a seemingly small hill gives the world a much better sense of realism and scale, without needing to make the land feel too cluttered. You can also go onto the other side of the spectrum and look at the actual mountainous regions of Hyrule and see just how magnificent they look. I recall playing it for the first time ever and being guided through a valley of breathtaking world design that ultimately led to Kakariko Village. It was such a beautiful moment for me as the game subtly hinted me to go towards such a gargantuan part of the world almost immediately after finishing the tutorial. This verticality was then heightened in the follow-up, Tears of the Kingdom. With all the trailers showcasing the brand new Sky Islands, Hyrule was being hyped up more than ever before. And what we ended up getting was, albeit some slightly disappointing additions to the map, but additions that gave more life to the world without a horizontal extension. Getting to explore these vast islands in the sky as wind brushed past Link's now radiant flowing hair was so captivating to me. It felt like the magic of the series' roots had come back in full force swinging, with such an exciting incorporation now being key to making Tears of the Kingdom feel not just like Breath of the Wild DLC, but a whole new world itself. There is a strange beauty to reversing time to allow yourself an easy elevator ride to a distant Sky Island. It was again a very simple way of adding life to this world, but it is life nonetheless. Not to mention the now incredible feeling of skydiving straight from high up into the gloomy cave system now deep below the surface of an already enormous Hyrule. Elden Ring also follows the gentle landscape rise that the Zelda games have. In a similar vein to Breath of the Wild's opening, your first view of the lands between immediately presents you with an arresting view of arguably the most detailed map a video game has ever had. A lush forest invaded with haunting human crosses rests ahead of a castle atop a deadly looking rock face, alongside a dilapidated bridge seemingly washed away with time. The geology from this single point is a masterclass of world design. The cliff formation evokes hostility with its spikes and ragged peaks, as well as its unusual layout that creates an uninviting atmosphere immediately upon seeing it. The Erdtree standing far out from the castle also helps the player grasp that whatever is resting here isn't associated with such a holy piece of nature that covers this entire land. This keeps on escalating as you get further into the game, traversing from Limgrave through Stormvale Castle and walking towards the magnificent site of Leonia of the Lakes is just one of the many instances that Elden Ring's landmass helps sell the feeling of the lands between. These toppling structures containing many of the hardest enemies in the game are all there to serve as an observable challenge that will soon become one you're physically battling against. Tormenting yourself is part of what makes Elden Ring a world not for the faint of heart, and I think the landscape does a masterful job of portraying that sense of intriguing fear. Without any idea of what beast lays ahead of you, the lands between draws you into its breathtaking areas that you will one day be able to conquer. But what about games that use modernized architecture to create its world? When I use the term climbing the metaphorical mountain, I'm of course not always going to be referring to a literal mountain. Sometimes that mountain could be a place that you may have been before, or maybe you even live at. And this game reminds me of that place more than anything I've experienced before. Mirror's Edge is a game all about running and jumping through a city too dystopian to currently exist. In its opening moments of Chapter 1, we get an immediate glimpse at this minimal city of skyscrapers and offices. Its overwhelming simplicity combined with its one-of-a-kind use of colour has led the game to becoming a cult classic, and without a doubt, the best parkour game ever made. And what Mirror's Edge is also known for is its visual style. From the instant you start the game, you can see that the city was strongly inspired by the likes of Singapore, Hong Kong and Tokyo, and this helped give the city a larger-than-life feel. Whilst constantly under reconstruction, this plain city of white uses its architectural marvel to make itself feel enormous. There's not a moment in this game where you aren't moving from building to building, creating an adrenaline rush that reminds me of when I do small parkour tricks as a kid along walls or rails. And what the game does with its movement is make itself feel tiring, even if you aren't the one doing the physical exercise. This city takes the breath out of Faith, as her breathing can be heard throughout the game in each and every moment. One of the main characters in the game even points this out to the player, showing that Faith has a huge challenge ahead of her, one that will mean sacrificing a lot to scale. Each chapter is a constant puzzle of parkour. Small hallways interweave between rooms of unnatural size, all within a building that Faith is there to climb near infinitely. This comes to head most prominently in the final chapter, simply titled The Shard. Starting in a concrete valley of tunnels and pipeworks, you quickly make your way up the skyscraper, constantly avoiding the tumultuous bullet fire coming from every direction. You fight your way through an elevator shaft, followed by a trek through some vents before landing yourself on a neighbouring set of buildings that further emphasise the enormity of the building you're actually there to summit. As you dash your way through even more endless corridors, you ultimately end up at the confrontational finale. And whilst yes, this ending is really lackluster, it doesn't take away from the gorgeous spectacle of the ending cutscene. As the camera pans out and you share a hug with your sister, the music kicks in with an entire view of the city magnetising your eyes at its glory. It isn't a natural summit, but a summit nonetheless, and one that makes you feel truly rewarded. And within this valley we're climbing, a monument of puzzle game perfection rests. A faint gust of wind echoes through a deserted void of mountains, before the title card takes its place on the screen. Monument Valley is a rarity in this form of media. A genre typically associated with poorly constructed swap games became revolutionized with the release of this masterpiece in 2014. Its intricate yet abstract visual identity combined with its all-show no-tell story about redemption and forgiveness is what has ultimately led Monument Valley to becoming a cult classic among both mobile and puzzle game enthusiasts. These peaceful geometric spectacles help create a world unlike anything I've ever seen. The isometric camera gives us a marginal glimpse into this abstract anomaly of a world, and this serves as an important part of the game's integral design. Monument Valley is a game that only shows you what you need to see. It goes against the conventional means of creating a detailed puzzle adventure, and instead chooses to shrink its design down to the fundamentals and nothing more. But what is this game actually about? Its linear storytelling matches its overall design in a way that can make its narrative feel just out of the realm of understanding for most players. Many people feel nostalgic towards it due to its atmosphere. Its gentle music is harmonious, allowing people to feel at ease regardless of how confusing a puzzle may get. Its obsession with negative space leaves the experience feeling like an otherworldly journey through time and space. But what people have forgotten is the true meaning of Monument Valley. A group of people belonging to the valley created majestic monuments using their vast knowledge of sacred geometry. The crows, witnessing the construction of these Goliaths, became envious and began stealing and replicating the knowledge belonging to the humans. As the human race began to crumble, they cursed the crows as punishment for their crimes, leaving them trapped in the monuments and suffering with an eternal amnesia. Without explanation, Ida, the princess of the crows, is awoken, and slowly becomes aware of her wanderings throughout the monuments. As you progress through each chapter, you venture through more and more treachery as the monuments become more complicated. Up until chapter 9, The Descent. You begin atop a rock in the middle of a storm-driven ocean. Angular waves crush the borders of this frail landmass as you reveal more and more of the rock's surface. Eventually, the rain stops and you enter the depths beneath the ocean floor. Light becomes increasingly scarce as your descent becomes mesmerizingly shrouded by your lack of geometry to travel along. Soon, you are left on a single line, descending deeper into what has then become an abstract horror. A graveyard of humans lays dormant at the bottom of this trench. The people that were responsible for the crow's madness are all here, dead. But instead of Ida critiquing them, she places down a rose. Not as a sign of weakness, but as a sign of forgiveness. And following this moment of solidarity, the crows all gather around Ida, as one by one, they begin to get freed by the magical force of the valley. They rise up, representing their bright pastel colours, before Ida herself is freed too, and they fight against the walls of the mountains and escape the valley. There's more that meets the eye when it comes to scaling a mountain. Sure, it's hard, but sometimes it could be a demonstration of how terrifying anger can really be. Getting Over It by Bennett Foddy is a game that needs no introduction. Being a pioneer of the infamous ragebait genre, this adventure up a randomly assorted pile of assets has become one of the most talked about games in the history of internet discourse. Whether it's Markiplier getting overwhelmed and blindsided by the invasive narration of a first playthrough, or an unprecedented speedrun that makes the game look like a cakewalk, Getting Over It has become more than just a game. On your first playthrough, you will get angry, that is a given. You'll feel cheated by the janky physics of what might be the shittiest hammer ever constructed. You'll start frantically jolting your mouse around thinking it will get you somewhere until it doesn't. You'll more than likely just switch the game off in a hissy fit tantrum, saying something like "fuck this shit, I'm never touching this dumb fucking game again, fuck off." But as with your personal mountain, you can never quite escape it. As hard as this game gets, the summit calls for you whenever you aren't around. That deplorable difficulty you want to avoid is the thing that keeps you from avoiding it. The trek up the mountain is directly referenced by the narrator the entire time. You just didn't want to hear him. There isn't a moment where Foddy doesn't remind you how proud he is if you finish the game. He knows your time with it would be over upon completion, but he doesn't sell himself as a greedy developer. He openly critiques the already fragile video game industry and is unabashed in his speech about the modern internet age and how he knows this game is just a moment in time. And this humanization of the narrator becomes a driving force in making you want to reach the peak as soon as you can. As you keep climbing, Foddy doesn't force his views onto the player anymore, but rather starts to thank you for what you've done. His sincerity and his tone makes me feel like I'm beating the game for both of us, with him acting as the internal voice in my head always telling me to keep going. It means a lot to me that you've come this far, endured this much. Every wisecrack, every insensitivity, every setback you've forgiven me is a kingly gift you've given me. And as the wind gusts around you and the environment becomes nothing but a tower atop a purple sky, the challenge you faced says its final goodbye.
Now, you've conquered the ice cliff, the platforms, the church, and the rectory, the living room and the factory, the playground, the construction site, the granite rocks, and the lakeside. You've learned to hike. There's no way left to go but up, and in a moment I'll shut up. But let me say, I'm glad you came.
A short hike can be just as beneficial a challenge as an impossible expedition up a menacing mountaintop, and no game sells this feeling greater than a short hike. This is the third time I've written about this game on my channel, and I doubt it will be the last time either. A Short Hike is an outstanding example of how good game design, captivating stories, and a wondrous charm can make any game feel special. Out of every game in this video, I think this is the one that almost everyone could pick up and play and immediately understand why I obsess over it. A short hike's main appeal is within the title itself. The time it takes to finish this hike is minuscule compared to many other games out there. My first playthrough only took an hour, and I can now consistently complete it in less than half of that time. For most games, you'd expect this amount of time spent with a game to lead to a meaningless outcome, as it doesn't have a crazy amount of time to flesh out its world or create interesting characters. But that's where a short hike is different. The game very quickly lays out its narrative within the first few minutes. You're on a trip away from the hustle and bustle of the city you live in, and want to make a call to your mother. But the only way to get in contact with her is to scale up Hawk Peak. Do not make a fucking joke about that name. Initially, Claire feels daunted by this, as she isn't properly equipped to make a climb so difficult. But the beauty of a short hike comes from the way Claire interacts with the fellow residents and the environment itself. The gameplay is incredibly simple, with just a handful of movement options being available to you, the main one being the inclusion of golden feathers. These are collectibles scattered all across the island and grant Claire with an additional bit of stamina that makes scaling the world much easier and, most importantly, more freeing. Despite their effortless inclusion, collecting one always feels like a small accomplishment for taking the time to visit every section of the island. They each open up more and more opportunities to venture further up the mountain without feeling like they get in the way of progression. The game is designed with multiple pathways in mind to make the ascent more approachable to anybody. Flower buds can sprawl from the ground using a bucket of water, and they give Claire a buoyant boost of height which can allow for some creative puzzle solving and progression. This way of adding traversal options into the world layout means that you can beat a short hike in however long you feel is necessary for you. The vibrant surroundings are there to show you what you could explore, not what you have to. And this stress-free approach is what makes the game a flawless experience about hope and overcoming your doubts. Life shouldn't be an immense day-to-day challenge. No matter how hard things can get, we should all have our own ways of facing those hardships and becoming a better, more peaceful version of ourselves. A short hike is a way to show that there is more to life than stress. Stress causes doubts, and doubts create fear. The fear of overcoming obstacles. This game is a golden feather itself, a small yet meaningful addition to our world that isn't confined by its miniature stature, because it truly leaves you feeling like you've just done something so difficult whilst making it feel so easy. There will always be setbacks on the climb. Things won't always be a breeze. But every so often, there can be something on that climb that makes the adventure worthwhile. That something can also be a fellow soul. In the game Journey, you take control of an unnamed character dressed in a smooth red robe across a barren desert. The opening doesn't grant the player any context as to who they are, where they are, and what they're even doing here. You simply get up off the sand and start walking. Upon reaching the top of the closest sand dune, an incredible sight appears in front of you. A mountain of incomprehensible size is sat in the far distance, and with nothing but your two legs to get you there, you keep walking. Up until you reach a statue containing several floating pieces of silk that grant the player with a floaty jump to traverse this wasteland with. And from there, the world design says it all. Journey is unique in that there isn't a single piece of dialogue for the whole game. Instead, the world design creates the entire narrative. In your first playthrough of Journey, it's hard to quantify the emotion it brings. I could recognise its significance on an emotional level, but I couldn't quite piece it all together and understand just why it felt so special. What I failed to realise until after the ending had presented itself was that Journey is a 90-minute representation of life itself. The first couple of levels are linear yet vast, giving players a feeling of wonder and excitement to explore as much as they want. The endless dunes stretching for miles either direction of you creates a sense of innocence as you keep discovering and learning more about the world you're surrounded by. This couldn't be more prevalent than the surfing section about 30 minutes into the game. After a calming adventure through the most open stretch of land the game has to offer, you begin surfing down a gargantuan sand river filled with unintelligible architecture. The music has a bright and hopeful tone to it, as robes fly with you in a blissful display of beauty. This happens soon after once again, only this time with even more scale. The music gets ever more powerful, and rays of sunshine glisten directly onto the character as they glide down a jaw-dropping sequence that just felt right. As you keep descending, the light gets trapped above, as you fall into a gloomy pit of darkness with nothing but the idle sounds of the desert floor enveloping your ears. We then reach the point of responsibility. You're isolated from your frail companions and must learn how to overcome your confusion and weakness. And this becomes a haunting task when you witness these menacing monsters creeping around the depths of you, trying everything they can to kill you. But you can survive. Now isn't your time. They almost get you, but at the last moment, you fight your way past. As you watch the cutscene at the end of this section, more pieces of the story start to make sense to you. In this game's world, you are the literal main character. You are the hero to your world, and you must be the one to tackle it. As you progress through Journey, the verticality of the landscape becomes higher and higher, reaching points of impossibility at times. This is the most prevalent when we finally reach the bottom of the mountain. Snow falls endlessly across the land as villainy remains present above you. The harsh winds begin to fight against you, doing all they can to push you further and further away from your goal. Your time on this planet begins to dwindle as your tiny body can't handle the chaotic weather conditions you're pleading with. You keep pushing. You don't want to stop. The light is right there. In a scene reminiscent of Rocket's brush with death, you're granted a second chance at life. You use the rest of your power to fly your way to the peak as sunlight begins to blind you, and you land in front of the summit. You walk peacefully into the light as the violins play with a somber tone, and your character reaches their end. But what I failed to tell you about this game up until now is that you don't need to do it alone. As I began exploring the dunes at my own pace, I was greeted with a fellow companion on my journey. I didn't know who they were, but I felt a strange sense of trust in them. I was confused to begin with as they were just spamming random buttons, and I believed that they were nothing more than an NPC. However, I started to travel with them, and instead of taking me on a wild goose chase, they began to help me. They guided me to unexplored areas, showed me secrets, and ended up leading me towards the final section of the area without saying a single word to me. I was impressed by how smart the AI seemed to be, especially for a game as old as Journey. But after I wrapped up my adventure, I watched a review of the game. It was only then that I found out that this wasn't an NPC. This was a human. Without a single word being spoken between us, I had unknowingly just became friends with someone completely unknown to me. They came and went in such a short amount of time that I didn't get the chance to fully realise what had happened. And this realisation became a leading factor in making Journey a game I don't think I'll ever forget. It helped me understand how disregarded others can be in your journey through life, and how valuable friendship is, especially when they can help you reach your goals. I resonated with the metaphor this game portrays because I've personally dealt with the feelings of isolation when losing contact with people I once cared for dearly. It's a depressing part of reality that all of us face, but none of us want to think about it, which is what makes me love Journey even more. For just giving me that reminder to be grateful about the people I love, to know that the mountain to climb can also be summited with someone else. It left me wishing I could have my childhood innocence back again, as the fear of growing up and facing the real world lingers ever closer to me as a 19-year-old. And to be real with you, there's so much more about going through life that is just shit. I wish sometimes it could be easier for us all. I wish that despite overcoming small struggles, I could reach a higher peak in my journey.
Same as last year. I think something must have closed me and swallowed the key. Now I'm standing right here, waiting in the middle of the night here. In the stars sometimes I see you see me too.
In 2018, I moved back to my home country after 7 years of being away. It was hard. Coming back to a country I'd only visited in the summer every other year wasn't an easy adjustment to make. I had just a single friend that I had known since birth, and a very poor interconnection with a lot of my family because I'd been away for so long. Still to this day, I'm managing the trauma that came from that experience, and the grief that comes with losing practically my whole life that I had known up to that point. And there was a game that I played recently that had been sat on my backlog for months, just gathering dust like the rest of my collection. Until one night I saw its short runtime and thought it was worth a go. And after a relaxing 3 hours, I came to realise the true power of Gris. Like Journey, Gris is a game that explains itself without dialogue. Much of Gris's storytelling is presented through its visually stunning watercolour aesthetic that uses colour itself in a way I've not seen done before. The brutalist architecture of Gris, matched with its incredibly philosophical approach to using colour in the environment, is what makes this game a gorgeous representation of grief. At the start of the game, Gris herself is seen singing atop a large stone hand belonging to her mother. But as she loses her voice, the stone beneath her shatters, leaving her to fall far down onto a desolate ground with no colour besides the hair resting on her head. As she wanders through the side-scrolling world, she soon encounters the remains of the stone hand she previously stood on. Blushes of red watercolour invade the space as a flock of birds swoop past in an entrancing display that left me emotionally vulnerable less than 10 minutes into the story. This red represents denial, the first stage of grief. When dealing with grief, it's normal to respond to the sudden change in emotion by pretending it never happened. You immediately are trying to escape your feelings, until at one stage, you have no choice but to face them head on. Like an avalanche, a flurry of red quickly consumes Gris, as she becomes increasingly more desperate to find solitude in whatever safety she can reach. The slide downwards here is you giving yourself time to absorb the news gradually, as a way to numb the feelings you're faced with. Later in the section, you get gifted with the ability to fight this storm with your dress, which acts as an overall metaphor for working through the anxiety that comes with fighting against grief. Instead of constantly falling back, you take slow steps forward until you've ultimately succeeded in getting past it. Gris continues to use its design philosophy to personify grief and make it the overarching emotional weight of the story. You face feelings of anger over what happened, followed by the bargaining stage, where you feel vulnerable and helpless, pleading for some form of resurrection. The bargaining stage is where you're at your lowest. It's terrifying having to overcome the thoughts about what could have been if things had played out a little differently. It can make you feel trapped from others and lead to, in my experience, a deep amount of psychological stress. This soon leads to depression as the embrace of your new reality sets in. You begin to isolate yourself further, pushing away others in an effort to fully cope with your emotions. You may feel foggy, heavy, and confused. Some people can even get stuck at this stage, resulting in an outcome that may feel worse than what it was prior. But if you keep pushing, you may just find a way out. Whilst you may not feel uplifted, the acceptance stage of grief is the most meaningful part of the whole journey. Your pessimism has now become more hopeful, even if it is fleeting. You've done a lot to make it this far and surmounted all the negative experiences that have caused this journey to begin with. And after dealing with the loss of her voice, the destruction of her mother, and her close shaves with death, Gris finds acceptance in her pain and restores the person she swore to protect. Thanks to her unwavering determination, she found her way back to the one she loves most, and she makes her way up to the clouds, where she remains stable and relieved. Jusant opens with a bleak shot of a forsaken wasteland besieged by the carcasses of boats sat idle and alone. We see a young person slowly travelling the inhospitable sands before looking up at a monstrous stone tower piercing through the clouds. They take off their glasses to get a better look at what's in front of them, but before the player is granted any control over this mysterious main character, we're already quite a way into our ascent. Your travels don't start at the base of the mountain, but rather, you're swiftly already up to a point in the mountain where basic upwards traversal now becomes a creative puzzle of stamina control and positioning. What makes Jusant such a provocative experience isn't just its heartwarming score or its breathtaking visuals, but instead its way of making the act of climbing feel fresh. Unlike many other games out there, Jusant doesn't rely on a single button input to traverse up a wall, but rather, it takes advantage of both your hands on the controller to make climbing feel constantly engaging. Each trigger represents a hand, so finding the right areas to grab onto becomes a constant back and forth struggle in itself. It led to my time with it feeling like a much needed change compared to what I had been conditioned to. But I am aware that this isn't the first game to use this style of gameplay. 2015's Grow Home is a game I hold a lot of nostalgia for, as it was one of the first PC games I'd ever played, and I found it to be an experience that never quite left my subconscious. It uses the same climbing style as Jusant, albeit tied to a much more creatively bankrupt storyline. However, I have to credit it for being the game that truly introduced me to this genre, and its influence on Jusant is certainly recognisable. Jusant is less of a climbing simulator and more of a masterpiece in environmental storytelling. The mountain you scale tells its story through its design and its verticality. Every flat surface in Jusant is packed with the abandoned items of a long-gone civilization. Pots and pans lay dormant on kitchen floors, barrels are tied to intricate vertical climbing panels dangling on a thin piece of rope that were clearly used as ways of transporting both people and goods up and down this monolithic structure. And cavernous structures remain concrete and stocked with a sufficient amount of resources as well. Without any direct communication with the player, the state of this mountain is clear. Everyone is gone, and they aren't coming back. And if we take a step back and think about the definition of Jusant, that awareness of how alone you truly are becomes ever more present. Jusant, a French nautical term for a receding tide. This simple 8-word explanation of the title is all we need to hear from the game to understand what's really happened. Despite Jusant's obsession with large lore dumps done using letters found around the mountain, you don't need to read a single one to understand that Jusant is not just a miner's quest about climbing, but a story about searching for hope in a world that has run out. That hope was once there though. Through both letters found in the tower as well as the environment itself, we learn that in Jusant's universe, the world has stopped turning, leaving the sun permanently dormant, which leads to a complete lack of rain. You discover that this mountain was once surrounded by water and home to multiple sailing communities that constantly moved up and down the pillar, depending on the tide. And because of the rainfall situation, the residents were left with two options: retreat the tower and risk surviving elsewhere, or stay where they feel like they belong and risk running out of options. This story is only ever discovered by exploration, which perfectly humanizes the experience as it feels like the main character is learning about this world at the same time you are. As you continue to make your way up the tower, the challenges of traversal become clear. Platforms turn into tiny rocks you can barely stand on, swinging across large gaps in the mountain becomes a constant relenting obstacle, and certain sections only become manageable via holding onto creatures that reside within these orange walls. Around halfway through the game, you blow a pipe in combination with a pulse wave that is sent through your cute companion, and life suddenly sprouts from nowhere as an abnormally huge beetle bursts through a rustic door leading to a diminished chasm hidden within the mountain. And without any words being spoken, you're suddenly engulfed in a claustrophobic greenhouse of plant life and magic. First entering this section, I thought I was near the end of the game, as its impact feels so much larger than it is. Eventually you scale a small area with little support being available to you, and then shimmy your way through a tiny gap in the wall, before being gifted with this. The music glistens with hope as you begin making your way through a massive underground cave with platforms elevated hundreds of meters in the sky. This area uses the negative space proudly, as you must swing your way across these pillars like vines through the jungle. Dazzling blue light illuminates from the fungi taking refuge, floating jellyfish guide you through the perilous walkways as you maintain your goal of summiting the tower. And at the end of this section, a moment plays that struck an emotional chord with me. The amalgamation of all the work it had taken to get here, combined with a ravishing score and charming identity, all leads to this final moment of peace. Fireflies awaken from their catacomb as light begins to besiege this Goliath of a room. The fireflies lift you higher as a church organ begins to play, giving you the feeling of satisfaction that you've finally finished the game. Or so you thought. What makes Jusant the perfect allegory for self-discovery comes from the remaining moments of Chapter 5 onwards. Heavy winds now torment the ascent, ever-changing without rhyme or reason, making your journey significantly more dangerous as you climb higher and higher. The music in this area is subdued, leaving you to ponder over the natural architecture of this fully overgrown mess of a mountain. Your stamina rapidly depletes as you fight against the airy current trying its best to push you away. There are still notes up here, but their tone now feels forlorn. No one knows what's up here. It's up to you to find out. Throughout the game, you learn from a girl named Bianca that at one point, she was part of an expedition team looking to discover the source of the water disappearance themselves. She mentions meeting a fellow group of people, Mete, Sol, Arlo and Becca, the latter of the four struggling thanks to the lack of water on the mountain. This is where we also hear about the Balasts, an assumed mythological creature responsible for stealing all the water. After some time, Bianca reunites with her friend Emmy, who introduces her to a tale she heard about, the legend of the Piper. This unknown person was thought to play music and bring back the rain or potentially celebrate it. And as you realise during your playthrough, you are this person. You are their saviour. The winds get harsher and the terrain becomes congested. All you have left to do is scale a thin stretch up to what appears to be another man-made structure. You hear distant wallows coming from a creature above, and as your stamina falls more, you keep rising. You've made it. Exchanging a glance at one another, you see your chance. The violin pauses, and you begin the final ascent. This sequence is one of my favourites in any game I've ever played. The somberness of the music, the vast never-ending scale showcased through the wide-angle shots, and the look of determination on your face as you know what you must do. The slow descent towards the central tower is an incredible opportunity to self-reflect on the journey thus far. You aren't using your climbing gear here, it's just a walk towards the most crucial structure in the game. You feel this sense of urgency whilst wanting the adventure to never end. And once you've made it to the base, there's only one thing you have left to do. It feels strange to admit when a game makes me tear up, but I can't help but appreciate how Jusant made me feel. The extravagance of this joyful ending left me wishing I could scale an even bigger mountain. It made me want to climb to even higher heights. I wanted an expedition longer than Jusant's. I wanted a final mountain to summit. And as the rain began to fall upon my relaxed body, I knew that this challenge was but a taste of something greater. Before we make our way up the final mountain, it's important to take a moment to rest and gather our thoughts. Use some time to think about the problems we've faced, the grief we've overcome, the path we've taken to get here. Everyone has their own means of understanding themselves, and their own way of analysing their accomplishments. And none have done that more for me than Quedeca's 2021 album, From Me to You.
We all got some fucking mountains of our own, shouting at the ground that's down below. Shoes plowing through the snow where all the flowers used to grow. In my surroundings I'm a speck, somehow a mountain to the whole. And in these moments I never felt both so small and larger than life. Thinking to myself, just don't fall from the largest of heights. And I've been looking at the summit. They say we're halfway there, I think we're halfway from it.
From Me to You is a story that inspired this video to begin with. This hour-long masterpiece by one of the most captivating indie artists of the modern era has stood the test of time and is still one of my favourite albums ever, as well as the rest of his discography. The album is all about the metaphorical climb of your own mountains, while simultaneously being about the physical climb too, as well as a narrative about a relationship. The meaning of the metaphor is immediately told in the intro song through a monologue done by a professional climber, which you heard at the beginning of this video. The ascent to success can be vastly different based on how far you need to go to achieve it, and the higher the altitude, the closer you are to death. This overarching narrative is explained through the lyrics in the album, as well as certain song titles. Kahlua and Verglas are both parts of a mountain, acting as the metaphorical checkpoints of his climb, just like I've done in this video. Holstadt is a town in Austria known for its mountainous environment. and many other songs help create a world surrounding Quedeca's own struggle with temper, loss, hardship, and isolation. These are all elements of life that could be personified in your scaling of whatever physical mountain you're there to climb. I listened to this album on repeat during the creation of this video. It gave me the motivation to pursue this hobby and treat it more seriously after struggling so much with motivation. It sometimes feels impossible to escape the feelings of isolation that comes from achieving success in this medium. The chances of something coming from this are next to impossible. But this album always reminds me to keep pushing. As a pessimistic person, it can feel like an absurd dream rather than a goal sometimes. Perhaps this video is meaningless to the world. Or perhaps this isn't the full picture. A gentle breeze fades through the sounds of a car radio as you close the door and begin walking through a mildly perilous opening sequence. You soon are met with an old woman standing patiently outside her dilapidated wooden cabin. You ask her for directions leading to what is only known as Celeste Mountain, and she directs you to the bridge just off screen. Thanking her for the answer, you let her know that her driveway will need some repairs after your brief brush with death. She laughs it off, simply stating that, if my driveway almost did you in, the mountain might be a bit much for you. You really clap back at the lady's remark, just before she gives you a warning you aren't fully interested in. I guess she was right. You can do this. Celeste's true journey begins in the Forsaken City, located at the base of the mountain. This first area serves as the perfect introduction for players to learn the game's core mechanics, while simultaneously serving as a beautiful display of emotion that comes from the song playing in the background. Its warping beats and cheerful instrumentation aids in making the early game feel like a true beginning to an unforgettable experience. Your first time through this city will let you come to terms with the difficulty in puzzle solving the game will continue to throw at you over its brief but impactful runtime. And this progressional design is balanced flawlessly through the entire ascent. The further you get up this mountain, the more the difficulty ramps up, and not in a way that leaves you wanting to give up. Sometimes there'll be moments where you fail over and over again in a single room, but if you keep pushing yourself, eventually that room becomes entirely obsolete, and you bring your attention to an entirely new challenge. I don't need to be the one to tell you that Celeste is a hard game. I think enough people have voiced their frustrations over the years. However, I don't think there has ever been a game so bombastically aggravating, yet so peaceful in its struggle. It makes it one of those adventures you can never seem to put down. You will die over and over and over and over and over again, sometimes hundreds of times. You will shout at this game knowing that the only thing stopping you from winning is you. Thanks to the incredible work done by Extremely OK Games, Celeste stays grounded in its approach to game design, and you will never end up blaming anything but yourself for all your deaths and confusion. It becomes an immensely rewarding trek up a fictional mountain because as the game gets harder, you get better. And that can of course be said for anything. The more you do something, the better you will get at it. But Celeste juggles your personal evolution with its own, better than any game I've ever played. There's an odd beauty to the struggle, one that makes you feel impassioned. Because Celeste isn't just a game about climbing a mountain. It's an exploration of failure, of doubt, of anxiety. There's many characters you meet throughout your playthrough of Celeste besides the granny. The end of chapter 1 introduces you to Theo, a bubbly and charismatic climber who acts as your best friend on your journey. His calm and carefree attitude combined with his charming personality leaves you to feeling close to him after just a single conversation. You also have Mr. Oshiro, a nervously confusing man who seemingly runs the now consumed Celestial Resort Hotel. His awkward negligence of you as well as the hotel he resides in leaves him seeming like the haunted remains of a man once renowned for the hotel he ran. And your opinions about him are ultimately made real when you choose to leave the hotel and he transforms into a demented wild animal hell-bent on killing you for going against him. And then there's the most crucial person in the whole game. Early in Chapter 2, you make your way through a majestic maze of blocks and caverns before coming face to face with someone new. This unknown purple entity is later learnt to be known as part of you, and it's clear that this isn't just any normal antagonist. Mimicking your exact appearance but with a pair of bright red stalking eyes, this figure isn't someone else, it's exactly what their name entails, a part of you. She's the physical manifestation of trauma, guilt, anguish and fear. She's the vivid reimagining of all the voices you aim to keep in your head. The voices that tear you down, eat at you endlessly and prevent you from achieving something more. Through each chapter in Celeste, these internal fears linger closer and closer to the surface, constantly pressuring you into turning away from the mountain. As you ascend up the Golden Ridge, massive windstorms submerge you in their grasp. Despite the vibrant allure of this chapter's scenery, it's the scariest part of your adventure thus far. Fatal spikes pierce through every surface, and strange bubbles lay in wait of your arrival, to be used to travel further distances without the use of a dash. And after this heart-pouncing race against the weather, you and Theo reunite at a cable car leading to the next chunk of the mountain. With some slight hesitation, you both set foot in its metal body and begin rising to the clouds. Things seem to be going fine until part of you returns, leaving you fearful for your life. You begin panicking as thousands of tentacle-like creatures rapidly descend on you. This isn't the mountain doing this, this is you. And despite the anxiety-inducing music and invasive colours, Theo tells you to imagine a feather. Imagine a feather gently floating in peaceful airspace. Nothing can get in the way of it. The feather now has control. You now have control. The adventure continues on, going through the eerie Mirror Temple. More obstacles get in your way as the peaceful sounds of a piano play gracefully in the background. This song isn't exactly hopeful sounding, rather it feels like a musical manifestation of anxiety itself. Subdued and minimal, the song Quiet and Falling is perhaps one of my favourite video game songs ever made. It elegantly captures that depleting feeling of isolation in one's own self. It captures that feeling of hidden chaos that attacks so many of us, no matter how much we want to deny it. Anxiety isn't always a bad thing, and we all face it in one way or another regardless of what life we live. But this is about Madeline's own anxiety. Or for me, my anxiety. The strange calmness of the Mirror Temple represents the constant desolation I feel so often in my life. I don't want people to know about the things I deal with on a daily basis. Thanks to stereotypes, I've found myself unable to properly be who I want to be, which always leads me down the path of pushing my emotions to the wayside in order to care for other people. But this can't last forever. At some point you have to break. Halfway through the temple, you're sucked into a deep vortex hidden within another mirror, one much larger than the one before. As you begin to lose control again, you take on the role of a seeker, a distorted eyeball-like creature that is dangerously hostile. It forces itself closer, not leaving you with any form of escape. You die, and reawaken in a now transformed version of the room you were just in. You again come face to face with the part of you who mocks you for believing that this is all her own doing. She critiques you once again, pressuring you into thinking that this temple reflects your own insecurities. You turn away that ideology and beg for their help. But this isn't her responsibility, it's yours. And after failing to come to an agreement, you angrily let go of yourself, acting like you're suddenly comfortable with scaling this mountain all alone, no matter how dangerous it may be. You save Theo from the clutches of the temple's power and share a heartwarming interaction together, with the game giving you the option to interact with him as much as you want to. It's not a short sequence, going on for over 8 minutes in my case, but I believe that makes the scene that much more valuable. After all your isolated tension built up and guilt seems to swarm around you, Theo brings you back to reality and is purely interested in learning more about you. It's a sweet moment in an otherwise depressing narrative. You fall asleep, and everything seems fine once again. Now in a strange dreamlike sequence, you start to understand that the problems you face can't be avoided forever. Some way or somehow, they have to be dealt with. And in this case, you choose to abandon that part of you. Becoming enraged, she bashes you for even thinking about pushing part of yourself away, leaving her to cut your feather and get thrown into a lush crystal chasm deep underground. Reflection is arguably the most important chapter in the game, as it finally answers many questions about the main character. The melancholic atmosphere of Celeste is most prominent in this chapter, as you become frustrated with that part of you that's preventing your summit. You end up meeting the granny from the start of the game once again, and she suggests talking to yourself to understand why they are so afraid of scaling the mountain. You agree. And after a riveting and extremely tough chase sequence that has you platforming through an absurd amount of rooms and obstacles, you finally get the chance to talk. You ask her to work with you in truly reaching the summit. You remind her that it's okay to feel scared sometimes. Not everything needs to always be perfect. And after a peaceful discussion, you both merge into one, granting you with an additional dash.
It's a path I can't find. Sisyphus, premise is the rock and roll. Vulnerable. Maybe it's my fate and it's all my fault, and I know you
It took a lot to get here. A campaign through torment, through pain, through self-doubt, through anxiety, and through fear. I told myself for so long that I couldn't do it, that I was weak, that I wasn't good enough. But I proved myself wrong. I conquered both mountains today. I really hope I can conquer more. This isn't where the story ends though. After finishing Celeste and feeling ready to write about it for this video, I knew that there was something I was missing. This whole time I made Celeste Mountain appear as the finale to a self-reflective odyssey through games all about overcoming your own doubts and anxieties. And that was the intention I had going into the game. But when I saw a preview of Chapter 9, I knew that I had one more mountain to climb. Celeste's free DLC chapter Farewell is, in my opinion, the true finale. Yes, you have the B and C sides that were already in the base game, but they didn't feel like any more of a final challenge compared to Chapter 7 in terms of overall personal impact. What makes Farewell such a special 2D platforming stage is its unabashed difficulty and unapologetic length. This level, even in a no-death speedrun, takes upwards of 40 minutes, so you can imagine the immense challenge that it serves to the average completionist like myself. My full playthrough of the base game took me 4.5 hours, as well as 529 deaths across its main 7 chapters. And as I did some research into Farewell, I came across these screenshots. Yeah, safe to say I was yet to face the true finale. So, without hesitation, I booted up Celeste once again, beat Chapter 8 which was hard enough on its own, and set off on the ultimate challenge. Farewell's opening is mournful. You're greeted with the sight of a gravestone belonging to the granny who helped you conquer your fears throughout Celeste. You never went to her funeral out of fear of your own safety, and you can't help but feel guilt over it. That is until a strange bird visits you momentarily, and you choose to follow it, believing it to be some form of personification for Granny's soul. And just like Badeline is a part of you, the bird may be a part of Granny. And so, you venture forward. Within the first few minutes, I rapidly came accustomed to the difficulty I was facing. Just to get through the first 8 rooms of Farewell took me over an hour, making it the longest I'd spent on a single portion of Celeste. Its challenge was brutal, kicking me down in every room I entered. Precarious floating rocks became saviours for me as I travelled treacherously through each part of this Goliath of a level. It began to add more and more pieces to the puzzle through each passing moment. Jellyfishes with floating physics constantly bewildered me during the ascent. Blobfishes became my least favourite struggle in the entire game, as I just couldn't get adjusted to their peculiar hitboxes. And let's not talk about the spikes that seemed to control any minuscule amount of space I could have had to myself. But despite how frustrating the stage felt, I was ecstatic every time I cleared a room. It didn't matter how many tries it took, reaching the right side of my screen felt like an enormous achievement no matter what. And I carried this determinism all the way through Singular, Power Source, Event Horizon, Fuck. I went back through the game's extras, got all the hearts I needed, and eventually carried on. This setback was grueling but calming as well. It gave me an opportunity to go back into earlier parts of the game, now with more experience, and beat them as an additional preparation for the gauntlet I was about to endure. And after this point, Farewell truly began. Immediately I was taught about wave dashing, an advanced movement technique involving a very precise set of inputs that allows you to gain a mid-air dash. I spent ages on these opening rooms coming to grips with the move and died probably 100 times before I became consistent with the trick. And from this point onwards, I knew I could do it. I died more times than I can count. I repeated the same techniques sporadically for hours, all in an effort to chase down this bird. But once you finally catch it, you realise that it's worthless. This bird isn't anything to do with Granny, it's simply trapped here because of you. So you decide to change course. You aren't here for Granny anymore. You're here to set this bird free. And that's exactly what you do. The final room drives you to success. This 2-minute marathon goes through all the things that you've already tackled in this chapter. You're left in a permanent loop of death, unable to truly defeat the final thing holding you back. You're right there. Just a bit further. Farewell is a tale about grief. It's a harrowing depiction of the day-to-day pain we feel after losing something of value to us. This isn't just a video game level, nor is it just an experience created to spark anger in the players that dare face its fury. Farewell is a story about hope, and about soaring past everything that holds you down. Farewell is the combined conclusion of all of these games. It's a physical demonstration of how strong the mind can really be, and how impactful these games could be not just as a piece of digital media, but as an art form. It's the final mountain I had to climb to make this video. It's the hardest mountain I've climbed in any video game ever. But another mountain is just around the corner. And one day, that will be climbed too. Okay, outro time. Outro. This video was a lot longer than I expected it to be. Originally I was only going to make about a half an hour long video, but I started scripting and it kind of just kept going. And yeah, you have now got what is pretty close to my longest video. It might even be my longest video after I finish the edit. Yeah, just want to say a massive thank you to anyone still watching, anyone that made it through this entire video. Go and play all of these games. Genuinely, they are some of my favourite experiences ever. I'm so glad I finally got to talk about Celeste. Jusant was a huge surprise to me, same with Gris. And obviously I showcased some games which I've spoken about a million times already. But yeah, this video was very difficult to make. It took a lot of work. Definitely the most work I've ever put into a project, probably ever. In terms of scripting, getting all the footage, researching a bunch of different things like that. I've not even edited this at the time of recording this, so I'm worried how long that's going to take. But I do want to apologise for this taking a lot longer than it probably should have. Hopefully my next video will not take as long. But I am away for a 4-day period at the end of March, because I'm going on a trip. But hopefully that doesn't alter my, workflow towards the next video. Again, just want to say a massive thank you. Also thank you Tesco Meal Deal as always for being a member. You're the GOAT. Yeah, this video was a lot, but I'm very proud of it. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. And I will see you all in the next one. Take care, everybody. Peace.